look at your income, your expenses, and your savings, and then do a stress test so that you get yourself secure. If you were to lose your income, or if the income were to fall beyond a certain level, and you play that out, how long can you live in an acceptable lifestyle? And do you have a savings that is adequate for that? Three most important circumstances that existed before we had the downturn, which was caused by a pandemic, but any downturn would have produced the same results. The three most important things that are happening in the world now are that we're at the end, late in a long-term debt cycle in which central banks cannot control monetary policy the same way. They can't lower interest rates. They can't get money to a lot of people who need the money in the traditional way. So just like in 1929 to 1932, there was a debt crisis that came as a result of an excessive amount of debt in the boom years. And then when you have that in 1932, we hit zero interest rates. And when they hit zero interest rates in 32, like in 2008, central bank prints money and buys financial assets. The important thing to know about this crisis, and that it happened in the 1930s, is that in order to get the checks that we're needing, a lot of people, a lot of companies need checks. Now, where will those checks come from? So there'll be checks from the government. The type of support we're going to receive is two types of support. Where's all this money come from? So the government, when they say, I'm going to pay more for unemployment insurance, or I'm going to give you a loan for a small business, or so on, where do they get the money from? Well, they either tax it, but if they tax it, that's bad. So the government, they can borrow it. That's what a deficit is. The government runs a deficit. And then the question is, who's going to borrow it when everybody's financially strapped? And the Federal Reserve says they have the power to print money, and they will say, I will borrow it and I will lend you the money. So the Federal Reserve is lending the money, and it is also lending others the money. The important thing to know is that all that we think about money is not limited in any way, like there's a certain amount of money out there. It's all make-believe. It's all digital. So they can change the digits and then they can create money. Now that's an important consideration, because if they can create money so easily, how do we know it's going to be of value when they're creating a lot of it? That's one of the considerations that are being faced today. But the main thing to know about this, stepping back for the big picture, is that every individual, every company, and every government has a certain amount of money that comes in the form of income, a certain amount of expenses, and then a certain amount of savings. So you do individually, and all your listeners do. And it works the same way for everyone, so that if their income falls and they less than their expenditures, they're in trouble unless they have a good saving. And then they go to the savings. So all around the world, there are lots of entities that are in trouble in that way. So the government, two parts of the government, the U.S. government, two parts, want to give checks to people. Now, it's difficult to decide who gets it, who doesn't get it. But if they don't give checks to people or to companies, those will go bankrupt because they may not have enough savings. So you saw J. Crew went bankrupt. And you'll see others go back because they don't have enough. And so when they go bankrupt, then that's a whole other process. So in order to prevent that, they have to give money. And so they print money. We call it print. There's not even paper much. It's digitally create money. And then that comes in the form of loans. Yeah, the Federal Reserve will buy government bonds. So it's a transaction of buying it. And they will also buy private bonds. They might pick a company, many companies, and they'll say, I will buy your bonds, which is the equivalent, I will lend to you. And that's happened through history. So what we're going through is the same process as happened in the 1930 to 1945 period. So as I was saying, there are three important things. That is one. The second is large wealth gap. Third is that we have a rising power in the form of China emerging to compete or challenge the United States leadership. So when you have these three things together, it's a challenging mix, and it's happened repeatedly. Less effective monetary and credit system makes it, they have to print a lot of money, can threaten the value of money. Second, when you have a large wealth gap and you have an economic downturn, people are more inclined to have conflict. So how that's dealt with, we're going to reconsider how that wealth will be divided, and that'll change taxes and relationships. And then the third is we're no longer in a world order where the United States is the only dominant power. These three things existed, and the most important things existed. And then we had the downturn in terms of the virus. So you could think of the virus like being a tsunami that came, and if it went, and if we had no more of it, it still would have left a lot of economic damage. So in all different ways. So the economic damage has to be understood and dealt with. What you do is you calculate, if I lived in a simpler lifestyle and I had this amount of earnings, how many months or years could I live acceptably? Then you look at what do you put the money in? So in Germany, Hitler came in power in 1933, and he came in power in 1933 because there was a lot of internal fighting as to try to produce order, because everybody, the left and the right, the communists and the fascists, and they're all fighting about wealth, because everybody's fighting about wealth when you have a downturn. And then they were democracies. 4 democracies existed then that chose not to be democracies because they became so disorderly that they wanted some strong leader to take charge and run the country. And then, of course, we had a bunch of those types of leaders, and then they had a war. That's how World War II happened. So when you look at that, that's kind of the political landscape. But back to the average man in terms of his finances, I would say the important thing is those three elements: to have a plan, and maybe to have a plan with both your family. How do you get down when things got tough, and then you have to look at what happens in policy. Well, policy depends on the person. Some people would understand more about policy than other people, so it depends on what they should do. It depends on what they're able to do well.
You might have heard this phrase, study smart, not hard, but where do you learn how to do it? In school, you learn what to learn, math, history, science, Spanish, but not so much on how to learn. It's rare to find classes on how to learn, how to think, how to remember, and how to study. In this fast-paced, ever-changing world, these are the skills that will serve you as a student, not only in school, but also in life. The things I'm going to talk about here is based in neuroscience and brain science. And so I'm going to share with you 4 things you need to stop immediately and 4 things you want to start. Number 1, I want you to stop multitasking. That's right, stop multitasking. Many of you believe that you're doing 2 things at once or 3 things at once, and you're not actually multitasking, because every single time you switch from one task to another, you have to regain your focus and your flow. And it could take anywhere from 5 minutes to 20 minutes. So the more accurate term is not multitasking, it's actually called task switching. But it takes more time, it's less productive, and there's more errors. There was a study done at University of London saying it can even lower your IQ. Multitasking or attempting to multitask can even lower your IQ, similar that if you stayed up all night. If you stayed up all night, it could actually drop up to 15 points. So I want you to do one single mental thing at a time. So stop multitasking. The second thing I'm going to ask you to stop is I want you to stop and eliminate distractions. In order for you to soar to the head of your class, you must focus. So turn your phone off, put it on airplane mode, put it in another room if you will, You could also use self-control apps if you're going to have your phone there, like Freedom or Focus Me, to block certain websites like Facebook or Twitter. Or you could even block everything except for the sites you need for your work. Number 3, I want you to stop cramming. Stop cramming. Many people don't study for days or weeks, and then they'll pull an all-nighter. They'll go 6 or 7 hours straight, which is really bad because you need sleep. That's where you consolidate short to long-term memory. But the big mistake that students are making, I see over and over again, is they study for too long a period without taking breaks. You heard me right. It's important to take breaks. We know you study better when you study in chunks. Your retention diminishes after about 25 or 30 minutes. There's a time management method called the Pomodoro technique, where you set a timer to break for your work into intervals, traditionally about 25 or 30 minutes. And then you take about a 2 to 3 or 4, maybe a 5-minute break to stretch, to breathe, to hydrate, and so on. Remember, as your body moves, your brain grooves. It also takes advantage of 2 very important memory principles that we teach in Quick Recall. It's called primacy and recency. Primacy says you tend to remember something in the beginning. Recency says you tend to remember stuff towards the end. Meaning that if I gave you a list of 30 words and you didn't have some of these memory techniques, you'd probably remember the words in the beginning, primacy, and the words towards the end, which are more recent, or recency. So what happens is if you study for 6 hours straight with no breaks, you remember the information towards the beginning and towards the end, but there's a huge dip in between for all that time. And the benefit of taking breaks every 30 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever you choose to break, is you create more beginnings and more ends, so you can recover a lot of that information. The 4th thing I'm going to ask you to stop is to hack this thing called acrasia. And now this is the state of acting against your own better judgment. And Socrates was said to have asked precisely, how is it possible that if one judges action A to be the best course of action, why would anyone do anything other than A? Right? You want to major in the major things, and focusing on the 80-20 rule, right? Pareto's principle. Focus on the 20% of the things that give you 80% of the results or the rewards. And the challenge is a lot of people can't stick with a course of behavior. So I would recommend apps like Stick or Beeminder, which helps you to keep your commitments. Now, I'm going to rapid fire give you the 4 things that you want to start. You want to start these 4 things. So number 1, I want you to practice what we call active recall. I actually don't recommend you reread textbook chapters over and over and over again. That's what most people do through rote repetition, because you could delude yourself that you know the information that you're reading instead of really testing yourself. I'd rather you close the book and recall and recite all that you could remember, because there's a difference between recognition and recollection. There's a big difference between recognition and recollection. Many times when you're rereading that chapter over again, you actually delude yourself thinking that you remember this information when you're really just recognizing it in front of you. Because recognizing requires a trigger for you to remember something, and you may not get that on a test. You probably very well likely get that on a test. So study actively with a focus on recollection and quiz yourself. Don't just glance over your notes, your highlighted notes. Number 2, I would say, is start doing spaced repetition. Basically what this is saying is you want to be able to space out your studying into intervals like you could your body when you're working it out. And separating the information, reviewing it through intervals, like maybe reviewing it an hour later, a day later, a week later, a few weeks later, helps to take it from your short-term to your long-term memory. And if you want software, many of you are very digital, that could help you accelerate that. There's a free software program called Anki, and it's like online flashcards, but they break it up into spaced repetition, so it makes it very straightforward on how to learn a language. Studying for medical or law exams, we use this kind of spaced repetition for memorizing people's names or faces, brushing up on your geography, mastering long poems, word for word verbatim, even practicing musical instruments like guitar chords. It helps having spaced repetition. Number 3 thing to start is using your sense of smell. Using your sense of smell. Here's the thing. A lot of people don't realize that your environment gets anchored to the information that you're learning. And so you can't always bring the environment into the place. So it's obviously better to study in the room that you're going to take the exam in, because you're unconsciously going to anchor that to the temperature, to the lighting, to the smells. All of that will get anchored to the information. But we can't always do that. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the environment in there with you. And one of the most powerful ways of doing that, actually most connected for your memory out of your senses, is your sense of smell, your olfactory sense. And so spraying an unfamiliar scent onto you, your body, maybe it could be an essential oil, a lip balm, a chewing gum. It's a very unique flavor or scent. It could be a perfume or a cologne. While you're doing that, while you're studying, then you actually put it back on when you need to be able to basically spray it again when you need to take an exam. And so the same thing could work with a different kind of unique kind of gum, will work the same way. Also, there's certain scents, for example, essential oils that actually stimulate and wake up the mind. Peppermint is very good for your focus of your senses, to improve your memory. Rosemary is really good for your memory also as well. So try tapping into your sense of smell. And then finally, number 4 thing to start doing is to listen to music. And not music that would distract you, not heavy metal, not rap, but research done at Stanford School of Medicine says that playing certain types of music, like classical music, especially from the Baroque era, it's 60 beats per minute, which is also harmonizes with the resting heart rate. And that could actually help accelerate the students to engage parts of your brain to help you pay attention and make predictions. It puts you into what they call an alpha state, a brainwave state, an alpha state, where you're relaxed and aware. Not to mention, listening to music can improve your mood and change your whole outlook in studying in general.
I can guarantee you there was probably 100 days where I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to stay in the pool or stay in my bed and not get out. But those were the days where you have to. You have to get up and do something, because I think that's really what separates the good from the great. The greats do things when they don't always want to do them.
I think the biggest thing that I've always said is never give up. And I never have, and nobody ever should. If they want something bad enough, they'll get it. They have to work for it. Yeah, it's not going to be easy, but if you want it bad enough, you'll do whatever it takes to get there. I think that's probably the easiest way to put it, and the best way to put it.
I wanted to do something that nobody's ever done, and that started with a dream and a goal. I wanted to be the greatest of all time. I went 5 straight years without missing a single day, 365 days a year, every single day. And in the sport of swimming, when you miss one day, it takes you 2 days to get back. So I was already that much, I was continuing to build on that throughout that time. And you know, that was kind of just how I was. There are days you're not going to want to do it, sure. I mean, everybody has those days. But it's what you do on those days that help you move forward.
You know, if you want to do something and you want it that bad, you'll make sacrifices. And you know, growing up for me as a kid, I made a lot of sacrifices that I didn't seem that they were a big deal, and I don't think of them as being a big deal right now. You know, there were Saturdays or Fridays where I'd give up going to a dance or hanging out with my friends because I had workout the next day. But those things that I gave up, you know, were things that I wanted to help me get to my goal. And there were times where I've been put in uncomfortable situations, but I've used my mental power, my mental strength to push through it. I think that's how you can look at any of the athletes in the world. I mean, Tiger, the guy has a busted knee and still comes and destroys the rest of the field. You know, that's the thing. It's like people don't make excuses. You know, some of the best athletes, or the greatest athletes in the world, do things when they're uncomfortable. You know, everybody can compete when they're feeling good, happy, excited, rested. But it's the best people who can overcome when they're tired, sore, not in the great mind, not in the best mindset. And I think mental power that the greatest athletes have can push all the pain aside. You know, and I mean, like when I was doing that Navy SEALs thing, was it easy for me to do it? No. Was it easy for me to climb over a 45-foot wall and look down? Not at all, and I'm afraid of heights. But, you know, I said to myself, I'm going to do this and no one's going to stop me. And I think that's the biggest thing, is how strong you can be mentally. I think that really shows who the person is. So I think that's one thing that separates the good from the greatest.
When I said I wanted to win 8 gold medals, basically half the people in the swimming world thought I was absolutely crazy and nobody could ever do something like that. But for me, I was somebody who believed in it and somebody who believed in the process of getting there. I knew it wasn't going to happen overnight, like I said before. But every little small thing that we did was a small stepping stone in order to even be able to have that chance and that opportunity to do what I did in 2008. So, when I say from 2002 to 2008 was basically trial and error. So for me in 2002, that's really when I started amping up my event schedule, where I was swimming 4 to 5 individual events and having a couple relays at Pan Pacs, World Championships, major international competitions throughout that time frame. Because at that time, at the Olympic Games, that's where I think the real truth comes out. Because I think there are a lot of people who are very talented who can make it there. There are very few people who can deal with the pressure and the stress that happens when we're there. So that's why I say we had to make sure that we were physically, emotionally, and mentally ready, because I had to be ready to be able to kind of manage my emotions through that week. Yeah, winning a gold medal is absolutely incredible. There's nothing better than standing on the podium listening to your national anthem play after you had just won a gold medal. But for me, I'm somebody who I knew that I had 7 other events after the first day. So I have to throw that in the back of my head. I got to throw that race out. Even though if even like in 08, I broke a world record, won my first gold medal. Like, I was like, cool, like things are starting really well. So I have to put that behind me to then get ready for the next race. And on top of that, I have to make sure I'm eating the right amount, I'm sleeping the right amount, my body is as fresh as I can possibly be. So that means sitting in an ice tank, getting massages, getting stretched, all of these small things that end up adding up to the major end result. And that was something that we learned through that process. So for us, we always also tried to compare. Every day is a new challenge, right? Every day is a challenge, is a day that we can prepare ourselves even more. So for us, we would call it putting money into the bank. So at the end of the year, when we had a major international competition, we could withdraw that money that we had saved throughout the year. And look, I'll be the first one to tell you, there were a lot of days where I did not want to get out of bed. And I guarantee you, if I ask the question here, if everybody is excited to get out of bed every single day, if I saw a hand, I'm going to blatantly call you a liar. Because we all know that is far from the truth. But if you have those little small goals, those little small things that get you excited when you don't want to, it's going to make it even better and even easier at the end when you're getting ready for a presentation at the end of the year, this or that, whatever event you're leading up to. It's going to make it so much easier. And I think if you look at the greats in anything in any walk of life, the greats do things when they don't always want to. And that's the separation. For me, that's what I've found. Because I can sure as hell tell you that there were days where I hated my coach. There were days when we got in fights, we got in arguments, we couldn't stand what we were doing. I would do things purposely to piss him off, but that's a different story. But, I think that was just really how we worked. Like, he was somebody who was so perfect for me that if I ever would have swam for anybody else, I never would have had the chance to do what I did, because he challenged me in ways and forced my mind to think differently. For me as a kid growing up, I'm huge into music, and music is a big part of my life. And I'm a huge Biggie Smalls fan, and he wrote a song called "The Sky Is the Limit." And as a kid growing up, I believed that. I believed that whatever I put my mind to, and if I was willing to make sacrifices and I was dedicated, that I could achieve absolutely anything.
And you still do?
I still do. For me, it was trying the process. I guess that's what it was. We were figuring out the process of what we had to do in order to stand up and be able to compete against the best in the world. So yeah, it was just the process of it all. So for me, it was easy to kind of push through it because I wanted it so bad. I had these quotes, I had these goals, I had, all of these things taped in my locker that I saw every day, when I got out of bed. And I think the biggest thing is during the days where I didn't want to go, or I was tired, I was sore, this, that, or the other, I still went. Because if I'm gonna go to practice and I'm gonna get 10%, 20%, 30% out of that day, it's better than getting 0. So I was always taking steps forward. And that's why everything worked out.
I use the provocative title, How to Get Rich, because it grabs people's attention. But we're really talking about wealthy. Wealthy is assets, right? And the goal here is to get out of 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is just modern slavery. Now, obviously, it's not the real horrific slavery that, people's ancestors experienced, but it is a modern, trimmed down form of slavery. It's wage slavery, right? You basically you don't choose when you wake up. You have to go to your drudgery job. You have to punch in the clock, punch in the hours, as if we're living in factory times, as if input has anything to do with output. Well, we live in the age of infinite leverage. With your mind, you can move mountains if you knew the right things to do. Elon Musk doesn't have more hours in the week than anybody else. He just spends it better. Or he has the knowledge to apply it better. Omniscience at some level implies omnipotence. If you were God, a God, and if you had infinite knowledge, you wouldn't actually need to do anything. But if you wanted to do something, you would literally just flick one particle of sand, and you just knew that the wave was going to hit all the other particles, that whatever you wanted to have happen would happen, because you just knew how everything connected to everything. So knowledge is literally power. So the way to earn in the modern world is through knowledge and leverage. It's not through work. And so you want to be a knowledge athlete if you want to earn, not a physical athlete. Physical athletes, we put them in showrooms like the Olympics so they can show off, or we do it for fun or for health, but it's not the way that you actually create and gain wealth. So to create wealth requires a couple of principles. Many of these are obvious, and it sort of helps kind of put them together. The place where I kind of create the framework around it, I say there are three things that you really need to do. The first is you need to have some specific knowledge. The second is you need to take on accountability. And the third is you need to have leverage. Those are the three key components. Specific knowledge is knowing how to do something that other people don't know how to do. And you can't be trained to do it. So then it begs the question, how do you learn it? What is specific knowledge? Examples of specific knowledge could be the artificial intelligence field is just coming up and I'm really deep into it. Or I have a really deep understanding of crypto. Or I know how to do sales of very difficult, large objects. Like I know how to sell houses that are broken down and in need of repair. Specific knowledge could be, I'm the most entertaining gamer on the planet. I can play games on Twitch in such a way that people just love talking to me. It could even just be, I'm a great clubhouse speaker, but on a certain kind of topic that other people just don't understand. So how do you gain specific knowledge? It's almost a catch-22. Specific knowledge is built up by you through your passions. So when they say follow your passion, that's kind of what they mean. It doesn't always lead to money, but it can, because if you're obsessive about something and you're learning it for your own genuine intellectual curiosity, not to get a degree, not to make money, not to impress your friends, you're going to end up being better at it than anybody else. So I really believe that you should only read and engage in activities that you genuinely enjoy. And you should cultivate your intellectual obsessions without any goal, but you may be surprised when you look back and connect the dots later that one of them developed into a goal. And one of the hallmarks of specific knowledge is that it will feel like play to you, but it will look like work to others. So that is anything that fits that model you should develop. So that is specific knowledge. Second, I would say you develop accountability. Accountability means taking on risks, branding it with your own name. Eponymous companies like, the Oprah company, or whatever you may think of them. Like before he became president, Trump was all about this. He would stamp his name on everything. Kanye West, right? Jay-Z, Elon Musk. These people use their names everywhere they go. But that means accountability comes with downsides. That means that when you do something stupid or horrible, you're tagged forever. If you screw up in public. So use your name, use accountability. And I know we live in an age of teamwork, and obviously a lot of great work is done by teams, but even within a company like a startup, founders and managers are always looking for people who will take on accountability. So accountability is a big piece of it. You're never going to get paid what you're worth if you don't take on accountability. And then finally, leverage. Leverage is the most important, because leverage is just increasing without bound in our society. And there's basically three forms of leverage. There's labor, which is people working for you. That's been around forever. And your parents know it, which is why, when you used to tell them, I've got a job, they ask, well, how many people are working for you? Or how big is the company? It sounds impressive. In reality, labor is the shittiest form of leverage. It takes too much effort to manage people. You're basically playing psychiatrist or babysitting. There's a lot of politics and emotions involved. And it's just very hard to do. That said, if you want to build the biggest fortunes or the most wealth, it has to be in your repertoire. There's a lot of misconceptions that go on in labor leverage. One example is people say, well, there's no such thing as a 10x engineer. Of course there is. There's 100x engineers. There's 1000x engineers. In intellectual disciplines, there's massive variance. It's Pareto distributed, not normal distributed, for those of you who know the distribution curves. But another one is hire people who are smarter than you. That's another piece of nonsense. Why are people who are smarter than you going to work for you? Nobody has a good answer to that one. So there is an answer, it's not a great one, which is you hire them when they're really young and you exploit them for a year or two before they figure out they're smarter than you and move on. So you can do some short-term opportunities, or you can invest in people who are smarter than you. But you also have to be really good at what you do, otherwise good people aren't going to work for you. Anyway, that's labor. Then next is capital. You can use capital. You make a trade, let's say you make a good trade on the stock market. Whether it's a trade you make with $100 or $1 million makes a huge difference. Even though it took the same brain power to come up with a trade, now you're magnified in the latter case by a factor of 10,000. How did you do that? That's leverage, right? That's capital leverage. The problem with capital leverage and labor leverage is that they're permission. Somebody has to give you the money. Somebody has to agree to work with you. They take time to get, they take effort to get. With the capital leverage, there's often risk involved, especially if it's your own capital. So that brings us to the last form of leverage, and this is the most powerful form of leverage, and it's behind all the newly rich, and that is product leverage. Product leverage comes from building a product, and if the product has no marginal cost of replication, in other words, you can stamp out more copies without having to incur costs, that is the best form of leverage. Product leverage ranges from code, where you create applications like Clubhouse. We're all on Paul Davison's piece of code here, and he's massively leveraged. Paul's not here right now. He's not running this conversation. We're all working for him. It also comes from media, like creating content, like Joe Rogan creates a podcast and gets stamped out. It can come from a book. It can come from even products like, someone sells you a pill, it could be a happy pill, a sugar pill, whatever. A pill is 98% intellectual property. The actual physical cost of what went in there is very low. So fundamentally, what you want to do is you want to put yourself in a situation where you take your specific knowledge that you've developed over the years without even trying, the things that you're good at, that other people are naturally bad at, that you got to by following your own intellectual obsessions. You add that to accountability, put your name on it, take some risks. You employ every form of leverage possible, capital, labor, and products and code, preferably the permissionless ones, because those you can get access to when you're younger. And the net result is you productize yourself. What you end up doing is you end up selling a product that is simply an extension of who you uniquely are. And nobody can beat you at that, because it's just you being you. And this can take a while to set up, but once you set this thing up, it will be a flood, a tsunami of money that will keep you flush for the rest of your life.
So I've always said if you spend 13 minutes a year on economics, you've wasted 10 minutes. All you need to know about the stock market is it goes up and it goes down, and it goes down a lot. And that's all you need to know. Again, it'd be terrific to know what's going to happen in the economy, but I deal with facts. If inventories are going up, if copper prices are going down, if room occupancy is going the wrong way, people building too many hotels. I look at freight car loading, so I own railroad stocks. I deal with facts. I don't deal with people tell me something's going to happen in the future. The first point is know what you own. I can't believe how many people own stocks. They couldn't describe to an 11-year-old in 2 minutes or less why they own this thing or what it is. I frankly think it's a tragedy in America that the small investor has been convinced by the media, the print media, the radio, the television media, that they don't have a chance. That the big institutions with all their computers and all their degrees and all their money have all the edges. And it just isn't true at all. And when they're convinced, when this happens, when this occurs, people act accordingly. When they believe it, they buy stocks for a week, and they buy options, and they buy the Chile fund this week, and next week it's the Argentina fund, and they get results proportionate to that kind of investment. And that's very bothersome. I think the public can do extremely well in the stock market on their own. I think the fact that institutions dominate the market today is a positive for small investors. These institutions push stocks on usual lows, they push them on usual highs. For someone that can sit back and have their own opinion and know something about an industry, this is a positive. Behind every stock is a company. If the company does terrific over a long period of time, the stock will do terrific. If the company does lousy, the stock's going to do lousy.
That's all you're betting on. You're saying, I believe strongly this company's going to do well. If you start to see symptoms that's not going to happen, the stock's going to very rapidly respond to that. If the company runs out of steam, the stock's going to run out of steam. Suppose you've made a 50% gain on two companies. One is a fast grower with a long way to go. The other is a big, lumbering, slow growth company that has already saturated 95% of its market, and that market itself is growing slowly. The 50% return is fantastic for the slow grower. The chances are it's time to sell it. The same 50% return will be just the tip of the iceberg for the fast grower. Fast growers, if successful, will always eventually slow their growth. They'll run out of places to go. Cyclicals experiencing long down cycles may become turnarounds. Once recovered, they probably will be cyclicals again. One thing we can say about companies in general, it's easier to go from $100 million in sales to $200 million in sales than it is to go from $10 billion in sales to $20 billion in sales. So smaller companies tend to have more upside potential than larger companies. But don't dismiss all big companies out of hand. Some big companies defy their size and find exciting new ways to grow their earnings. As well, good opportunities exist in companies that are cyclical, regardless of their size.
The single most important thing to me in the stock market for anyone is to know what you own. I'm amazed how many people own stocks. They would not be able to tell you why they own it. They couldn't say in a minute or less why they own it. Actually, if you really press them down, they'd say, the reason I own this is the sucker's going up. And that's the only reason. That's the only reason they own it. And if you can't explain, I'm serious, you can't explain to a 10-year-old in 2 minutes or less why you own a stock, you shouldn't own it.
The price of a stock will follow the direction of earnings. In almost every case, you can generally state that if a company's earnings go up sharply, the stock's going to go up. If earnings go from very poor to mediocre, the stock's probably going to rise. If they go from mediocre to good, it's probably going to have another rise. If it goes from good to excellent, it's probably going to have another rise. Or if a company's earnings grow dramatically over a long period of time, the stock's probably going to go up dramatically.
If you really understand a company, you should know how it plans to make earnings rise. A company with a long history of earnings increases and dividend increases is obviously a stable performer that has a reasonable chance to continue to perform well in the industry. But just because a company has had a great record in the past does not mean earnings will grow terrifically well in the future.
I'm trying to convince people there is a method. There are reasons for stocks that go up. Coca-Cola is earning 30 times per share what they did 32 years ago. The stock has gone up 30-fold. Bethlehem Steel is earning less than they did 30 years ago. The stock is half its price of 30 years ago. Stocks are not lottery tickets. There's a company behind every stock. If a company does well, the stock does well. It's not that complicated.
Price-earnings ratio is something that some people make very complex. It's actually very simple. If a company is selling $100 a share and they're earning $10, it has a price-earnings multiple of 10. The PE ratio can be thought of as the number of years it will take the company to earn back the amount of your initial investment, assuming, of course, that the company's earnings stay constant.
The higher the PE, the more expensive the stock relative to the company's future earning power. A fairly priced stock is a PE that's about equal to the expected annual growth rate over the next 3 to 5 years. If the PE is substantially higher than the growth rate, the stock is normally expensive. If the PE is substantially lower, the stock is probably cheap. The stock PE, in part, depends on the industry that it's in. When you look at a growth company, compare the company's growth rate and its own PE to that of the industry. All other things being equal, if you find a company with a much lower PE and a higher growth rate, you're off to a good start.
No one can predict the stock market. They try to predict interest rates. I mean, this is it. If anybody could predict interest rates right 3 times in a row, they'd be a billionaire. There can't be that many people who can predict interest rates because there'd be lots of billionaires. And no one can predict the economy. I had a lot of people in this room were around in 1981 and 82 when we had a 20% prime rate with double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment. I don't remember anybody telling me in 1981 about it. I didn't read, I studied all this stuff. I don't remember anybody telling me we're going to have the worst recession since the Depression. So what I'm trying to tell you, it'd be very useful to know what the stock market is going to do. It'd be terrific to know that the Dow Jones average a year from now would be X, that we're going to have a full-scale recession, or interest rates are going to be 12%. That's useful stuff. You never know it, though. What you learn from history is the market goes down. It goes down a lot. The math is simple. There's been 93 years this century. This is easy to do. The market's had 50 declines of 10% or more. So 50 declines in 93 years. About once every 2 years, the market falls 10%. We call that a correction. 50 declines in 93 years, about once every 2 years, the market falls 10%. Of those 50 declines, 15 have been 25% or more. That's known as a bear market. We've had 15 declines in 93 years. So every 6 years, the market's going to have a 25% decline. That's all you need to know. You need to know the market's going to go down sometime. If you're not ready for that, you shouldn't own stocks.
So I've always said if you spend 13 minutes a year on economics, you've wasted 10 minutes. All you need to know about the stock market is it goes up and it goes down, and it goes down a lot. And that's all you need to know. Again, it'd be terrific to know what's going to happen in the economy, but I deal with facts. If inventories are going up, if copper prices are going down, if room occupancy is going the wrong way, if people are building too many hotels, I look at freight car loadings when I own railroad stocks. I deal with facts. I don't deal with people tell me something's going to happen in the future.